Hey there. Thanks for purchasing this course, Building a Mobile App Part 2. Now, if you've not watched Part 1, I highly recommend that you do so. Like I'd also mentioned in the preview that you probably watched before you purchase the course. You can watch this without watching that or do it in any order. It's all right. But that said, I highly recommend that you sort of watch them in sequence because we took a couple of different apps in the previous course and we're going to use the same ones here, right? We looked at Snowpals app briefly and we also looked at the Panera Bread app and we talked about a number of different things, but particularly from a UI UX standpoint. What we're going to do in this course is actually pick up from where we left off, and we're going to talk about some other facets of building a mobile app. Two in particular. One essentially is going to be local storage. What are the kinds of data that you may want to store locally on your device versus storing on the server? That's one thing we'll cover. And the second item we'll talk about are UI components. Now, the two apps that we're going to look at, both Panera Bread and Snowpal. One, it's our own app. We built it. So what I'm going to tell you is literally what we leveraged and how we went about it. The other one, we're just going to sort of draw a parallel because I have no idea how that was built. So I'm going to sort of speculate, if you will, and we're going to draw some parallels and compare and contrast to see if we find any commonalities and or differences because that should help our learning. Again, I could have just done this using our app Snowpal, but that would be one example, and then we know all of the internals of that. So I'm going to tell you literally how we built it. But I thought it also would add value if we took the second one that we don't quite know about and are able to have the freedom to make a bunch of assumptions and sort of speculate, if you will. So that's the idea. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to share my entire screen. Okay. And I want to make sure that it is shared. So I'm going to just check this out. Okay, cool. I think we are good. Okay. So I am going to be doing interacting with the phone on my hand, but you're going to see it here. So, that hopefully there shouldn't be any lag, but I'm just letting you know. I'm going to use my cursor to point over this part of the screen, but when I'm actually interacting with it, I'm going to pick it up on my hand and then do it because I'm unable to interact through this. It's not iPhone mirroring, doing it through some other fashion here. Okay, so I think we have the background, so we can sort of jump right in. And again, before we do that, maybe one quick thing: if you haven't checked out the other course, just go to getsnowpal.com and you can find the part one and purchase it, watch it, and then come back to watching this. Right? It's entirely up to you. So this is our app. What you see here is a Snowpal app, and we're also going to take the other one, which is the Panera Bread app, right? Okay. So we're going to go back and forth. We're not going to try and talk about things they say pick up from where you left off, start over. Okay. Because we looked at I shared my feedback on the UI, UX. We identified a fair number of bugs and we talked about a number of different things, but trying to keep our focus on the user interface and user experience. Like in this one, we're going to switch gears, like I mentioned. So let's look at components, right? Maybe that's the first thing we can look at. We could start with our apps. This Panera Bread, it doesn't really matter. You know what? Maybe I'll just start with ours. Okay. So much like you're building web apps, anything that you build with as a user interface, you want to componentize it. Depending on the language or the framework that you're using, some of the terminologies could change, but the fundamentals don't necessarily change. There is a notion of, I might sometimes be using React language and other times probably some other frameworks language. So just take the actual words with a grain of salt. The idea here is to impress upon you the approach, the process, and everything. I want to make sure I'm recording. Yes, I am. Yeah. More than the terminologies, because that you can look up outside of the course as well. So, at the highest level, you have a notion of presentational components and functional components. And now, again, there are finer differences between a few different frameworks and the way they address this. But at the generic level, a presentational component is literally what those two words mean. What do you see visually, right? From a cosmetic standpoint, let's look at some, and then let's go to the other, right? The functional components. So if you look at this dashboard, after you sign in to the Snowpal page, you're welcome to the dashboard. That this is your quote unquote the home page on the mobile device, on the mobile app. Here you see a number of things like unread notifications, conversations, blogs, pods, tasks, right? Some of it is our terminology. Like notifications and conversations are generic. Blocks, pods are, system specific terminology. And after you use it for a few minutes, probably even before then, you'll get acclimated to those terminologies. We have a notion of keys, which is like a project. What you have underneath those keys are called blocks. You can also have pods underneath them, so they can be at the same level, but the pod is more like a leaf, right? Whereas the block is a folder. It can have nested folders underneath them, and at the point you hit a pod, and that's kind of the end of that hierarchy, right? That's the basic terminology for what it's worth. So we show you what your 100 notifications are. So this is a component. What do you see? So the dashboard page, the page itself is a component, and we have many different pages. As you can see here, as you maneuver through the app, you'll see a lot of different pages. So there are a number of different pages or screens. Each of them is a component. Even if your app has, like, I think we counted Panera Bread roughly, they have like 20 unique, maybe 17 to 20 unique screens from what we could tell. Unique in the way they look doesn't mean that there are that many components, but just unique in the way they look. Our product is a lot broader because Panera Bread is an app that you're able to order food at the restaurant, so there's only so much you can do. Ours is a pretty powerful app because it's a project management platform, an app that goes alongside with the web app that's on the right side here. So it's got a ton of features. So there's a lot of screens and a lot of components. But at the lowest level, at the granular level, a page is a component. Page or a screen, I'm going to use that synonymously. When you have different types of pages or different types of screens, then that becomes its own component, right? So in other words, the again, I don't know if there's more to sort of explain there or elaborate there. All that I'm trying to say is there are different kinds of pages, and just because you have different variations of a page, like if you look at a page as a class, if you will, and then different pages are instances of those pages, the instance is just another page that follows the template of the core page itself, right? So that's one component, at least the way I'm calling it. But when you have a different structure altogether, then it becomes a new page or a new screen, a second component, right? So we have different page components, a number of page components. This is one kind of page component. And this might be unique because I don't know if we are actually using this in very many places. Now, if you don't expect to use something in more than one place, you could argue that it does not have to be componentized. But it's not that much harder to componentize something. So you won't take that approach as from a design pattern standpoint. So that way, if you need something tomorrow, you can easily churn those second and third and the 100th pages a whole lot faster than if you just built it differently. So this is one component, the page component. And within that, you see that you have this section that shows you the number of 100 notifications. And if you break that down, it has sort of a header, if you will, right? A color, a border just on the top. It has a count for the number of 100 notifications. It has label, says what it is, and then there is an icon. Now all the others are exactly the same. The count is dynamic, comes from the server. The text is dynamic. Well, it's dynamic to the extent that you see here. It's 5 of them. We don't have this list. This list does not grow necessarily. So the number is entirely dynamic. It just depends on how many you have. The text is static, but it's unique to that particular instance of that component. And then you have the icon that changes, right? But again, the notifications and the notification bell, they are paired. They go together. And then there's the count, and then the card is in the background. That's essentially what that component is made of. Now, if you create the component and had support for it, wherever you want to show something that looks anything similar to this, you can literally repurpose this component. Now, how generic you want this component to be in your design systems, it's entirely up to you. I recommend that you don't over engineer it. Now, can this count be positioned elsewhere on on this component, right? The count being maybe on the right side or at the bottom or something. Similarly, the icon, the size of those icons and colors and whatnot, right? You can go the whole 9 yards. There's one approach is to not have any components and rebuild every time, which doesn't make sense. Sure, so you don't want to do it. The other extreme of that, the other end of the spectrum, is over engineering a component so it's so generic that you can do just about anything with it, except that you're not going to be doing all of those things, right? It's like the 80-20 rule in marketing. So find the balance, just whatever is efficient, right? Don't let the perfect come in the way of the good. So that makes so this is a page component, and then we saw the card there. And now if you go to keys, for instance, this is a little bit taller. This card is a different component because it's got an image in the background, but that the other one does not support images. This has a title, but it also has modified date. It has a label, and it has some actions associated with that. Now, this actions list is dynamic. It just depends on what you're trying to do. That list is going to change. But enough said, this you can tell is a different component, but everything else is the same component with just different data. Right now, we've seen a second component. Now, if I go to system keys, it's pretty much the same. The only difference is there are no actions that you can perform. You can click through, which you can do here as well, but you don't have any other actions you can perform. You cannot archive a system key, for instance. So we don't have that. Now, that does that make it an entirely different component? Not really, right? It's just one more element that's on the component that you either have it or not. A simple boolean, for instance. So, if you recall, or if you've seen the previous video, the course, you know that we've talked about building and assembling these pages. When your product team comes and talks to you as an engineering team, like, hey, I want to do this. I don't know, I want to solve world hunger. You first figure out what you try to bring it down to a minimalistic point, which is I want to satiate the appetite of one person. Even if my end goal is to, sort of solve world hunger, I have to start with one person, right? A journey of 1,000 miles, as we know, starts with a single step. Quoting one of the famous philosophers, it's not something I'm saying, it's just something that's there in my office room here. So you want to bring it down to feeding one person, and then after that you want to figure out what kind of food am I feeding, right? It's vegetarian, is it meat, is it vegan, is it something else? So you try to make the problem as small as you can and make iterative progress, which is very important because you start designing to solving world hunger on day one, you're never ever going to release the simplest version of your product, which even satisfies the satiates appetite of a single person. Anyway, so back to what I'm trying to say here, right? So try to come up, once you come up with the minimalistic simplest thing, then try to create build that with the least number of components that you possibly can, right? Just the first version of it, just something quick and dirty, so you can socialize that quickly with your teams, the product owner, and maybe your end users and customers as well. So the quicker you can get something out there, the better off you are. So while these components look the way they look right now, they didn't certainly start out this way, right? I mean, I don't have, okay, this one let's look at this, right? So this is recent, the pods that I've interacted with recently. Invoice for December. We went to a Michael Costa Kennedy Center show recently. So this has got a border at the top and it's got a label and a modified date. No, they are different. So that's a different component, right? So it's a different component. It has its purpose. You put that in your design system and you use it wherever you need it. We have the same one for, we use that for blocks and pods essentially. So, and I believe we used that for recent. This is what you saw recently, and that's the other tab is what is due, what's coming up shortly. Like you have something that you have to act upon. But I'm pretty sure those cards are identical. So we've created one component and then we've used them in all these places. And similarly, if you go through our app, there's like I told you, there's tons of features. There's a lot of pages, slash screens, and a number of components. So if you go to a design system, you're going to see a number of them. And then when you build a new page, you do it as quickly as you can, looking to see if there is an existing page template or a page component that you can reuse. And if there is one, do you have other, card and actions and other types of components that are also either part of the page already? So you get everything with the page, or you just get the page, or you just get a component and then you assemble the new pages as quickly as you can. The idea is to sort of build it nice and generic enough is the keyword there, in the early part of the game when you build it for the first time, so you can then start churning out pages and functionality and features in real quick time. Now that we've looked at some of our apps features, let's now go to Panera Bread. Let's look at sort of what their components are. Now with ours, I told you literally what they are because we built it and I know it. Here I'm speculating. The idea behind this course is to sort of draw a parallel between a system that and you have access to another system that you actually have no clue about, but you're able to have the luxury of making these sort of assumptions, if you will. So here, this is a component. Let's see. How far are we? Yep, you're about 15 minutes in. We try to keep our courses to about 45 minutes to an hour, so they're not too long. So they're pragmatic. They're they teach you exactly what you need to know from a practicality standpoint, and they're not very theoretical, and they are very affordable, right? I mean, most of our courses, the majority of them are cost less than a drink at Starbucks. So it doesn't break the bank. in the process of teaching you whatever it is that we do know. And plus, if you're a course creator, you're an expert in your industry, in your field, or you even whatever level of expertise you do have, you want to monetize that, you're able to publish your courses on our platform and monetize that way. We just take a small cut for all of the work we have to do in terms of hosting it and supporting it on our web and mobile platforms. And for every unit of sale that is made on your course, you get the majority of the revenue that's generated by that course. So definitely, if there is an interest, hit us up. Okay, back to this. Now, this is a component. It's my go-to order, and we talked about in the previous course what that is. They have a color, and then it's favorited because this is essentially, I believe you can have a number of favorites, with one of them being your top most favorite. I think it's only one of them from what I can tell. I don't think I can have many go-to orders from what I've seen, at least. And they differentiate a go-to order from a regular order by just by virtue of having the background, so and then there is a text at the top. But let's look at these two at the same time, right? They look pretty identical, correct? You see there's an icon, and the my go-to order has a label with italicized label at the top. Outside of that, they're exactly the same, right? I mean, this one has an image. My go-to order does not have an image, right? And then the favorite, the location is at the bottom here, and then there's a price. So they are out. I reckon they are, they are the same component with some differences. One of them can have a label, one of them can have a background color, and then the favorite can have a different background color as well. And then there's either an image or set of images that show up there. So imagine you're creating a component, and then anybody who needs to use this, whether it's on this page, and I think I've seen something like this on other screens as well on their app, they end up reusing that component. So that's, to me, it's a single component we have identified so far. Now let's go to the next one, rewards and offers. This one, it's got an image, a text in bold, regular text, and then there's a redeem button with an icon, info icon, right? So this, okay, if I go here, yep. So those are one. It's basically one component. This text here, the info text, I want to say it's resizing based on the height of this paragraph here, right? So it's basically, this modal is also a component, right? It's got a label, it's got a heading, it's got some text, verbiage, and then there's a button. So we identified a component outside here, and this is the second one. When I click this, I see the modal. That's the third component, right? Now when I go to redeem, I guess I go to this page. So to me, this is a screen. So that's their screen component. And within that, they have each of these sections with a title, with a subheader maybe, or a subtitle. Not subtitle in that sense, but a header and a subheader. And then there's an image. So it's the same component repeated, right? So in other words, they're pulling some data back, and then they are showing that with the text and the image. What does this component, what does it need to comprise of? It needs it needs a label, heading here. It can have a second line, right? That's the second attribute in that component. It can have an image, or it does have an image, right? It's three. And then when you click, something happens, right? You're taken somewhere else. Now that click action is also part of that component. Now, if your navigation on a component is driven by virtue of where it's placed or who's acting upon it or when it happens, it could get as tricky as you want for it to be. But in the basic case, like the one we've seen, it is also an attribute on the component, right? Now, whether you want to have navigation tied to the visual component, maybe, maybe not, right? I don't want to go into too many details here because it's hard to imagine a lot of this in theory. At least we're seeing it practically. But what I mean is without drawing something out specifically, right? Like a design or an architecture diagram. Okay, so those are, so let's give, I'm going to lose track of the count, so I'm just not going to worry about the count. Let's just keep identifying more components here. This whole thing is like a card, right? It has got a heading, again, a title, an action, the location, number of items, price, and the order number. Now these are separated by a dot. Now you can either have a component with a list with three possible items, or that could be dynamic. But again, given the fact that it's on mobile and it's not, I'm pretty certain it's never going to be more than three. So you kind of lock it down to, hey, I have a number of items, I have a price, I have an order number. The items is again static text. You have the count, the dollar, the changes, order is static text, and then the order number essentially. Um, Now, we talked about usability in the previous course. I won't go in there, but again, an order number, sure, it's that long, but if you have to, I don't know why it has to be that many digits. I don't even know how many this is. I doubt they've actually processed that many orders, so I don't know why the number is pretty unfriendly. I would say it should be probably like 6 characters or so, because if you're calling in to check on the order number, imagine reading out the list of how many is it? 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12. I think it's like 16, probably 16 digits. Okay, and then we have something that says customize the label, because I customized it. Here, this is not customized. And then you have some details about it. You have an ad and a favorite and a dollar amount and an image. So this is whatever that, we don't even go to the details of how, all the building blocks of this component, but you can tell that this is a component. It's either yesterday or December 15th. They look identical, right? So it's nice, pretty component. So that is one of them, that if you're using it here or elsewhere, you can reuse it. This section, again, they have this text in a lot of different places. Probably it's required by the government or something, I am guessing. So that is a component. It's pretty much static text. So it shows up in many different places. Search, yeah, we have search as well in Snowpal. We have search here on the Panera app. That is a component. So now you get the idea, right? But let's do let's look at some more, and then we can call this part of the course done. Starting a new order. This is a new page. It's got 4 sections. Now again, not everything has to be dynamic, right? Now you could argue, but when I was talking about over engineering, this list here, sure, you want it to be a list, so it's not hard coded, only 4. You only support 4 items, because tomorrow you want a 5th one here. You shouldn't have to modify your component, correct? You should be able to do this through config or dynamically through one of other n number of ways. So what you don't want to do is hard code it to be 4. At the same time, do not over genericize it. If for whatever reason, making a bunch of assumptions, creating it as 4 is good and good enough for what you're doing right now, and maybe doing it as not being, being it a making it a growing list. Say it's difficult for whatever reason. Maybe it's easy enough for you to implement as a developer, but maybe the impact that it potentially has on other systems or integration or backend or whatnot, right? Again, assumptions. If for or bureaucracy, which comes in the way all the time in many organizations as well, it's going to take you extra time. Figure out whether it's worth it. If it's not worth the time, don't bother, right? Don't let perfect come in the way of the good. Just go roll. So this one has 4 items: icon, heading, some text, and then an action arrow. So that's basically a screen component, and then there is this within that as well, right? So the page component, and then that little section in there. Now you go in each of this, the location, the name of that property or that address internally is like as Panera addresses that as say a South Riding location or an Ashburn location or a Shantley location. That's linked, and then you have the distance, the address, the timings, icon, some label, and then the order button. Again, you can see that this is one component and it's repeated any number of times, right? So basically it takes your zip code, figures out what are the closest ones, sorts them by distance, and then it's showing them in this list. Uh, yep, it sorts them in ascending order by distance, right? It's showing you the closest one first, obviously. Okay, and then they have some filters here. You can filter. So that's functionality. So remember I talked about presentational components and functional components. So this one here in cafe and drive through, it's a filter. And when you filter it, there is something happening, right? You're just not showing ones that do not qualify as drive throughs or in cafe. So that's a piece of functionality, and that can loosely become part of a sort of a present, sort of a loosely a functional component, right? I mean, if you go to the details of it, there will be quite a bit of differences there. So let me do it. Let me just say React presentational versus function. Let's see. Let's maybe go to let's just look at this AI's answer. The distinction between presentational and functional components is not as clear cut as it used to be, which is why, I was telling you, take it with a grain of salt. Let's just look at what this is and see if it ties back to what I was trying to say earlier. Presentational components, these are focused with how things look. The focus, they receive data and callbacks as props, like we looked at, things that have data, and some of them that we had seen would have callbacks, typically don't contain complex logic or state management, right? Because it's the state management is outside of those presentational components, because they are meant to be like dumb components, quote unquote. That is, they are only worried about the rendering aspects of things. Okay, benefits, reusability, we talked about it, testability and readability. Now, functional components, if you don't know hooks, then you're probably not a React person. That's all right. You can just look it up. Uh, Hooks have been around a while. So the functional components can have state and lifecycle methods, blurring the lines between presentational and container components, right? So the if anything that that deals with state management and lifecycle, it essentially becomes a functional component. But I'm still looking for a slightly better answer. You can now write components that handle both presentation and logic within a single functional component. That's possible. Preferred way to write React components. Uh, let's look at this answer. Let's look at here. Let's spend like 30 seconds and then see if we can get the answer here. I'm going to a bunch of pages to see. Thanks to Sai Ram Soma. Assuming we find the answer here. You know what? I think maybe hopefully before the end of this, I still want to show React functional component example. Reusable UI elements. Yep. In other words, the way I see it, any interactions that you're going to have with the server, right? Your presentational components should have, like it said, very little logic, if any. So they are mainly focused, loosely speaking, they're mainly focused on the rendering aspects. How does something look? What is the color, the layout, the placement, and all of those things that appear that are visual. If you're when you're doing interactions and slash integration with your servers, with your server to get data and whatnot, all of those API calls, for instance, would become part of your functional components, right? I don't expect those to be part of the presentational components at all. Now, where it becomes gray is there can sometimes be functional components from what I've seen that have a presentational element to it. So that's when it kind of sort of does both things. But hopefully that separation, makes some sense to you, right? At least I want to give you an idea. Again, I rely more on the practicality of things. We at Snowpal, that's how we roll, more than the theory. So, our theory, take it with a grain of salt, but from the practicality standpoint, how pragmatic what we're saying there is, and we strongly believe it is because, that's how we've implemented all of our products and, functionality. And we have a number of them out there in production used by thousands of people. Okay, so back to this. This is a bunch of locations, and then if I click order, it takes me here. That's a new page, right? It's completely different from anything we've seen before. Is it in cafe? Are you going to pick up? Are you going to order now or pick up later? You pick one or the other and hit continue, and then you're presented with this. And we've seen, I think we saw this before. We saw this before, right? Yep, we saw these before. So what we would have counted like 6 to 8 components maybe at this point, and then this one here. Yep, that looks new. It's got a big image, big size image with the heading, some text, and then order now. Maybe it's new. And then back to the same one again. And I go to sandwiches. And this is a new one. There's an image and there's a label on top, text, price, add and customize. Now there are a lot of components I've noticed on the Panera app that are similar, yet slightly different. The image might be on the opposite side, the buttons could be bigger, different the number of buttons could be different. Some have one, some have two, sometimes there is three. So those, again, now you can actually create one presentation component or one component. I'm just not going to call it qualified just to keep it simple. You can create one component and have it, let's see. Oh, we are at the half an hour mark. So I think it's almost time to switch to the other part of the scores. But let me wrap up by saying you want to make it generic enough so it's useful and you can chug along. What you do not want to do is over engineer a component or make it so generic that you can have a system with just one component with a lot of different variations because that becomes very messy and it becomes difficult to use, difficult to maintain, manage, or scale. So scale from an efficiency standpoint, right? Not from a performance standpoint, obviously. So come up with a fair number of components, whatever that makes what to you. If you ask me what are the number if the Panera design system, which I have no idea how it looks or if there is even one, how many components might they have? I'm going to ballpark this, so I could be way off here. I want to say maybe 50 tops. I don't see them having any more than that, if that at all. But again, it just depends on how they've architected it, right? And this is a complete guess. So it gives you an idea. They have about 17 pages that were reasonably unique. Not that they were completely different from each other. They were different at least. And then I'm saying 50 components, so you get an idea. When someone says build a food app for me, that's sort of what you have to size up. How many pages, how many components, what kind of functionality, what the integration is. So within at the end of your first meeting, you're able to tell your client, yeah, kind of here's how much time I think it'll take, how much money you're gonna have to spend building this, assuming we built it a certain way. So that's, I think we've scraped the surface there, but I think we've scratched the surface there. Sorry, we scratched the surface there. But I think we talked a fair bit about what components mean from a mobile app standpoint and how you have to sort of look at them, how many you want to have, whether it should be very generic or not. So we've talked about a number of different things. I think that's kind of what I want to share with you. Before I call this part wraps, let's see. Well, let me share one more thing, right? So we have charts, but the charting framework that we use on the web, it's very rich, but they don't have support on mobile, right? So if I go to something like this, like say if I go here, on the right side is our web app. So if I go here, you're seeing essentially, I don't know whether I went to this. Let's see which one I went to. I want to get to keys. I'm going to go to stocks. I'm going to go to charts. If I do this, yep, you see it's the exact same, right? Content. So we've repurposed our page here, sort of made it responsive to fit the mobile app. But what you're seeing on the left side is a web view. So we have a web view component for items. I don't know if we have it in more than one place. Basically, everywhere we have charts. Since the charting framework does not have mobile support, we end up repurposing our web implementation on mobile. Other than that, everything else you see is mobile functionality, native to mobile. The richness of an app and its functionality is when you do it on mobile directly. We would love to do it, and at some point, we will actually rework our charts so we can use a different library and implement it on our mobile devices. We just haven't had the time to do it now. It's down in our list of things to do in the roadmap for 2025. So, but that's basically, I just want to show it to you quickly. That is a component that we didn't see. I know Panera Bread has probably that, which is what I mentioned in the previous course. They have a contact us, which most likely is a web view component from what I can tell. So that's everything. I think we are more than past the halfway mark here. So let's just switch gears now. Let's see. Yep. Let's switch gears to local storage. What is local storage? Now, in the last course, I mentioned that the slow. We talked about the slowness of the Panera Bread app. It's very very slow, right? And you can check out that course to get my feedback and thoughts on that particular item. But let's pick up from where we left off there. It's slow, probably for many reasons. One of them being, I don't know if it's doing a server side fetch where it does not have to. So let me force close the app, and I go to Panera. You'll see the splash screen for a second, and then you see this render. Now this data, is it sitting locally on the device or is it coming from the server? I have to believe it's coming from the server because you may have gone in to place an order on their web app as well. Unfortunately, I signed up using my Apple sign in on Panera Bread on my phone, on my iPhone. And when we went to their website, we noticed that they don't even support Apple sign in, so there is a complete disconnect there. We have Apple sign in here, and we also have Apple sign in on our mobile app. And surely, as you can expect, we have it synced. So it's merged. You sign up in one place, you're able to access the other, and data created is pretty much in sync. And we are a small company, right? They don't have that. So I guess there's no way for me to look at this data on the web because they just don't support Apple sign in there. Anyway, so if you just use their email password and signed up, maybe then you're able to see that on both sides. So this data has to come from the server because you could have placed more orders and they'll show up there. Or I don't know if you go to the store and not use the app to order, whether they ask you for like something that identifies you as the customer. So you get, maybe, I don't know, we get some points, or if you do, whether that data makes its way into the mobile app. I have no idea. Maybe they don't even support something like this, but I'm just purely speculating. But you can see that if the data would have been synced, let's say with an email password sign up, that would have to come from the server. So that's understandable. The data is coming from the server. But now let's say I go to, I don't know, I go here, I go delivery. Let's say actually I want to get out of that page. I want to go to start a new order, dine in, pick a location, continue, sandwiches. So I've gone through a bunch of different pages. Now I want to go back to the main page and see what happens. So if I go here. So I just went two steps back, right? Two arrows back. I actually want to do something else. I want to get out of this page entirely. Okay, I clicked a few different things. Now I think I got out of that page. Now I'm back. I'm trying to, I want to get here without the back arrows. Maybe there's a way, maybe there isn't. Okay, so they have the breadcrumb that takes you back to the first page. So I want to show something, talk about something, but I don't know if I can do it here. But let's see. I think it's all right. So the next time we come back here, there is not a request that's going to the server. So in the meantime, after you went to those two pages, if you had placed an order on the web and you came back to this first page, my guess is that you would not see that new order because I somehow get the feeling that they are not making that request to the server. That data is stored locally on your device because you want to do as much as you can locally, which is sort of what we do as well. That way, the response time is very quick. Now, there are a number of times that you have to make a request to the server and you still want to keep your response times very, very quick. So your SLA should be well under like 200 milliseconds, if that. And we try our level best to do that. That way, things are not anywhere close to as slow as we notice them on Panera Bread, where I'm even performing like basic actions. So you have to make a decision as a team as to what are the types of things I can and should store locally, what I have no reason to actually fetch from the server. Now let's say you go to a sandwich and you go to this one. There's an image and there's details about this, whatnot, right? The ingredients, the nutritional info. Now, does this data have to come from the server? I don't think so. This data should be on the device for the most part. Now, you could ask me, that, hey, what if the calories change? What if there was a typo? Or what if the ingredients change? Or what if they change the recipe? Does it mean I have to ship a new version? Maybe, right? But maybe not. If you don't want to do that, which doesn't seem like a good idea, you can build some logic where the data happens to live locally, but every once in a while, or it looks for a certain flag where you say, you know what, things changed, or you have a flag that says menu changed. You make an API call to an endpoint that checks every so often to see if the menu changed and how frequently is that menu going to change. I've been going to restaurants, even this one, where for 10 years nothing ever changes. So it's very, very infrequent. So you can make that request maybe every so often. And if things changed, you get a response back from the server saying, yep, something changed. And then you can do a subsequent request to fetch all the menu data and update it like one time, right? That's one way to do it. That way, data always lives locally. You only occasionally and very rarely go do that to fetch data. So that is how you want to determine, one of the ways to determine what should be stored locally versus on the server. Now if we take a parallel and look at ours, see, with Panera Bread they have the luxury of a lot of this being very generic to everybody. The spices chicken say about a dipper is now going to change in the way it looks, or the way it's built or constructed or prepared, whether Krish is looking at it or Scarlett's looking at it, right? It doesn't matter. Whereas our data is not like that, right? Ours is it's a product. It's not, Panera Bread is an app for a restaurant, right? Whereas ours is a product. This is our, it's not a cost center, right? That's how we make money. Whereas for Panera Bread, you could look at an app as kind of a cost center because they sell food, but they need to build this and spend money in building this, so they facilitate the ordering of that food so they make more money. So yes, it brings revenue, but not directly so, because you're not paying for the app. Even in our case, majority of our features are free, but there are some features that that we support in app, we require that you make an in-app purchase for, as you start using the app a lot more and leverage all of its powerful functionality. So that's back to this, right? The data is very dynamic. All of this data is very specific to at the end user. So there's we don't have the luxury of storing as much locally as Panera Bread does. But that said, you'll be surprised, or may not be, to know how much we store locally because we want to make this experience very seamless and quick for you. So we have, that's for a different course altogether, the specifics of it. But I'll tell you this much that we taken a lot of pain in constructing and in architecting and implementing that. The server, the calls being made to the server only happen when they actually need to happen and they're not happening needlessly. Because I've seen many a system where it's almost like the UI developer decided, you know what, I'm not going to store anything locally for everything. I'm going to fetch from the server. But that doesn't make sense because it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to be slow, and maybe that explains some of the slowness we are seeing on the Panera Bread app. I don't know. So there's a ton of data you can store locally. What do you like? For instance, like we go back to the first page. Once we fetch that, we don't ever have to go fetch this my go to order unless something changes. Now, the likelihood of somebody using the mobile and the web at the same time contiguously for ordering food probably is not the most common scenario, right? It's an edge case where somebody's doing it in both places and very, very frequently. So you can rely on a mechanism of fetching data or checking to see if things changed every so often, as opposed to being paranoid about it and checking all too frequently. So there is this concern of stale data. Sure, you'd never want to serve stale data, but there's a big difference between being worried about serving stale data versus versus making innumerable and excessive number of requests to your server and just making things dog slow, if you will. So that's one. Let's see something else, right? Let's go to continue browsing. This list here. This list, I don't know how often it's going to change. So that's something that probably can be stored locally and it should be stored locally. Now, again, if this list changes, you want to have support to figure that out so you don't have to reship an app because this changed, right? The only time you're reshipping is because you're fixing bugs on the client, obviously not on the server, so you don't have to reship. You're fixing client bugs, you're changing some images that if these images, I'm guessing they are stored locally as well on the app because now you can get these images from S3 and a number of places. But given the fact that these never ever seem to change, there is nothing dynamic about them. I don't know because they are small images, they're not that big, so they could very much become part of your app. Now, the question to answer there is if I put all of them, if I have thousands of images, which probably is not the case here, if I stored all of them locally, then the size of the app is going to become bigger. My download time is going to become longer. So people are going to click download or install and they're going to wait there for longer than they want to be. And then they're going to cancel and be not interested. And the moment they delete their app once, trust me, it's very unlikely that they're going to ever go back and download. It just doesn't happen. So those are decisions you have to make. That's a decision for your product team, not so much your engineering team in that sense. So you then decide what you store. And I go to Soups and Mac and I have this list here. Again, even if this is actually coming from the server, it's not coming through an API call to your actual core functionality. This could be a JSON that's sitting on S3 where you have a JSON structure. So tomorrow, if you change autumn squash soup to autumn soup or remove the word in season because it's past Christmas or the holidays and then you don't, it's not in season, not that it's tied to the holidays, I'm just assuming, you want to remove that text. You just update the JSON and do it, and that's very interesting because we do a ton of things like that, a number of things like that. Even if it's not local, you would then figure where should it be? Should it just be like a file, a small text file, an ASCII file on S3, or does it have to be an API call that's actually made to a server? Because that's a whole lot more expensive in terms of the time it's going to actually take. Right, so those are items that you decide. Now, going back to ours. Oops, going back to ours. So we do a ton of caching, right? So we fetch data, we store locally, and we have a complete system built around how to cache. And we may only have a course on that. I'm not sure. Let's see if I go here. Yeah, Flutter mobile app caching. It's only like $5.49. So if you want to check out how we've implemented caching, that's something, again, it costs, I'm pretty sure a drink at Starbucks costs more money than that. You can check out how we've implemented caching. So since we already have a course, I'm not going to talk about it here. So we do a lot of caching. And then again, how we invalidate the cache, whether it's expiration-based caching or invalidation-based caching, all of that interesting stuff you can check out in that course. I'm not going to talk about it here. So back to app here. What else do you think they can store locally? Let's see. Search the menu, customization. Okay. So all of these things again, I don't think any of this should have a server request. There should be a server, not every time for sure, right? So let me go to something else. Let's see. Actually, no, let me go to sandwiches, orders, click here. I'm going to go to customize. You see, that page renders in no time, right? That's because I'm pretty certain that is not a server side request because it's just data that's there locally. Now, how they've done it, whether they've fetched it once and stored everything locally or it is shipped with the app, I don't know. And why you may want to do one or the other is there's a number of different reasons. There's pros and cons with each approach. There are some things you want to store entirely locally and some partly locally and others not locally at all. So now let's say the multigrain bread has like a 50 cents. Right now that price could change. Maybe there's inflation. Maybe things become more expensive in 2025. As I'm understanding, they might very well become. So like avocado prices are expected to go up, for instance, I'm told. So that number would change. You certainly do not want to ship a new version of the app because what if people don't download the new version of the app? Forget shipping a new version. Let's take this. Let's say someone chose to not download the latest version. You now have to have functionality that says, I cannot make this order anymore because you're on an older version of the app because prices have changed, which is terrible user experience, right? Or you have some other way to deal with that. But long story short, that is number is going to have to be dynamic. And maybe how it's designed is the multigrain bagel flat is used in a number of different sandwiches, so it's not necessarily associated with it's tied to this sandwich, but it's also tied to other sandwiches, so there is like a one is to n relationship. So that data uh, maybe comes from the server, but once you fetch it, which is 50 cents, and tomorrow it becomes 75 cents, like a 50% increase, you don't have to refetch it when you go to a different sandwich because you already have the data, right? So that's the kind of decision you make as to what do I fetch, how often do I fetch, where do I store, I mean, on my device, how do I store it? And when you go through your simulators, depending on your Android app or your iPhone app, the way it gets stored is very different. So you can look at the data and see how it's being stored or how you want for it to be stored, what format you like for it to be stored in, whether it's JSON, which is kind of what we like pretty much most of the time, unless we're doing Golang, which supports like protobuf and other kinds of data exchange mechanisms, binary mechanisms, if you will. So JSON is our preferred format, but you could possibly have something else if you prefer, or you have just stored as text. However you do it, the key part is you're going to have to choose to essentially do it that way, so your user experience actually improves. So I think this is a good point. I don't know if there's more I want to share here. Yeah, about like 10 minutes to go because I try to keep the courses to about an hour, like I mentioned to you. Sometimes it becomes lengthier and it's not something what we aim to keep it under that. 45 minutes to an hour is our ideal sweet spot. I'm trying to think if I were you, what other questions you might have when it comes to local storage. Again, the more specifics of that storage, how we've implemented it specifically at Snowpal, why we've done it, and how we've done it, you can check out the other course like I mentioned. Um, so I think we are at a good point to call it wraps on this one. So what I will do is again, definitely check out getsnowpal.com for the list of current courses that you have available. And if you want a custom course design, we are time permitting, we are able to sometimes do that as well. But obviously it's going to cost a lot more money. The one that's super affordable, like what was it? I saw one for $299. Price that low, it's trying to help you not break your bank and at the same time make it available to you so you can learn and hone your skill sets and grow in your career or start a business, whatever it is that your heart beats for. The courses are available on our mobile apps as well. Let me show that to you really quickly. You can go to our mobile app, and then you can go through the course list, right? So you can go through a course list. You can buy it as an in-app purchase on your iPhone or Android device, or do it on the web. Essentially, it's the same content. It's just that on the phone, it's much more available when you're on the MOS, pretty much. Okay, so let me stop sharing. So let's do a quick recap, right? So we took a couple of different apps. One that we built, we own Snowpal, and we also looked at the Panera Bread app, something that we Honestly, we have no idea how it was built, but we're just speculating by looking at it as an end user. We drew some parallels, try to find some similarities between the two in terms of, we talked about components quite a bit actually the first half hour of this course. And then we talked about local storage, when you might choose to store some locally and some data not locally. And that was essentially the crux of what I wanted to cover in this course. Hopefully, that's kind of what you were expecting as well. That's about it. So, until next time, thank you.